have some remarks I'd like to share with you all this morning on our way to the shofar service and holding those words that Abigail just shared with us as we consider this. The Machzor says, Hayom Harat Olam. Today the world is conceived. I think the Machzor actually translates it, our Machzor translates it as, today is the birthday of the world, which is like, I don't agree. The words mean today the world is fresh with potential. It is teeming with vitality. It is filled with the promise of the future. That's what we say in our prayers today and yesterday. But our biblical texts, our Torah texts and our Haftarot tell a different story. Our prayers celebrate fertility on a cosmic level. The world is pregnant with possibility. In contrast, our Torah and Haftarah passages explore the complex pathos inherent in our human drive to bring new life into the world. These texts acknowledge the many facets of our human drive to fulfill the Torah's first commandment, pru uravu, to be fruitful and multiply, or as one of my favorite poets, Khalil Gibran, says, acknowledging life's longing for itself. This morning's Haftarah completed the Rosh Hashanah focus on our foremothers, on their wish to conceive, on their pain, their joy, their suffering, and their resilience. Our sages taught that these matriarchs, all of them struggled with infertility, all conceived on Rosh Hashanah. But their stories don't end there with conception. Through the portraits of Sarah and Hannah yesterday, and Rachel today, we see our own experiences reflected back to us, whether parents, children, or just people. Conception isn't always easy or even accessible. Pregnancy can be difficult and sometimes dangerous. Childbirth can be fatal. Child rearing creates new vulnerabilities. First and foremost, the possibility of grief and loss. And then there's the whole question of the challenge of being a child for another day. Yesterday, we read the account in the Torah of Sarah, the mother of all tiger mothers, determined to see her son receive the birthright and also create so much pain for Hagar and Ishmael after Sarah herself, orchestrated the whole conception of Isaac. And today, we feel Sarah's mute presence in the terrible story of the Akedah, after which, according to Midrash, she dies of a broken heart. Abraham, her stalwart partner, apparently loses his mind in a religious fundamentalist trance and nearly kills the son that they longed for so many years. Isaac survives only to mourn his mother to the point of near madness, healed only by the arrival of the feisty and also infertile Rebecca. Rebecca's motherhood story isn't programmed into our holiday services, but her struggle to conceive and then to raise two very different sons could easily fit in here with her mother-in-law, Sarah, and her daughter-in-law, Rachel. Then we heard the beautiful story of Hannah yesterday, whose longing for a child is so deep, she reaches down into her own gut for her own true prayer, becoming so enraptured in her plea to God that she is accused of drunken impropriety. Even when her prayers are answered, she conceives and gives birth to a son. She then has to send that son back into temple service because that's what she promised in her bargain with God. Shmuel, is the original prototype for classical prophecy. not too shabby. He anoints Israel's first king and establishes the monarchy for better or for worse, and makes quite a name for himself. But does he visit his mother? Perhaps not. We have to have a little fun, right? We just now read from the prophet Jeremiah, Kevin just read so beautifully, who famously chooses our foremother, Rachel, to transmit his message to his community. In a moment of national pain and fear, Jeremiah says to his people, the ancient Israelites, at the beginning of the Babylonian exile, that, to quote our own Joel Bremen, it will be okay. And that if it's not okay, that means it's not over yet. He uses the image of Rachel, who already by Jeremiah's time was a beloved historical figure, to reassure his people that they will survive this captivity and return to their homeland, to their own land. I've titled these remarks Rachel's Tears, as a reference to Jeremiah's portrait of Rachel. So let's just take a look. If you open back your machzor to page 566, you can see the words that inspired this image. Bottom of 565 or 66 for the English or the Hebrew, just the last line there and going on to the next page. In Jeremiah's words, Ko amar Adonai, kol berama nishma. Thus says God, a voice is heard in Ramah. Nehi bechi tamrurim. There is the sound of bitter, bitter wailing. Rachel mevaka al baneha. Rachel is crying for her children, weeping for them. And if you turn the page, she is crying and refuses to be consoled because those children are no longer. And the voice of God comes back to her. Min'i kolech mi bechi ve'enayich mi dim'a ki yesh sachar lif'ulatech. Hold back your tears. Your efforts are done, and there's going to be a reward, even though you can't see it right now. Rachel is the grand finale of the Rosh Hashanah matriarchs, showing up in our texts after Sarah, after Hannah, and her story couldn't be more poignant this year. The great Adin Steinsaltz, the teacher of Talmud, the Talmid Chacham, comments about her, Rachel, who did not have an easy life, is the personification of the weeping mother in Israel. She suffered when she was childless and when she gave birth to sons, and she can understand the pain, bereavement, and loneliness of her descendants. And Steinsaltz quotes Jeremiah here. She refuses to be consoled for her children, for the people. Each and every child is gone. As I've said before, I'm so drawn to this. In Jeremiah's portrait of Rachel, she's frozen, weeping for all eternity by the side of the road, all alone. She never gets to heal. We never meet her, we just got the image in the poem, as a wise old woman, having endured the suffering she endured, but prevailing in building a life for herself. Since the founding of modern Israel, Jewish mothers and fathers have had to learn a new kind of grief. A kind of grief that maybe was unknown in the Jewish community for most of the last 2,000 years, the grief of losing a child in war. We know that Yom HaZikaron, Israeli Memorial Day, is a much different one than our American version. And I say this with full acknowledgement of the heroic and self-sacrificing offerings of our own soldiers in the United States. But just think about what you did last Memorial Day. I went on a trip. I usually have a barbecue. There's weekend getaways. Israelis, by contrast, hold each other as they remember losses of their loved ones and as they face the reality that these losses are ongoing. Since October 7th, parental grief in Israel has reached a whole different level. And of course, it's important, really essential to acknowledge that that grief is not limited to Jews, not limited to Israelis. As Laura Griff so beautifully reminded us yesterday, we are capable of gam v'gam, of acknowledging this and that. And of course, not long after October 7th, one Israeli mother came to international attention. She caught my attention because we share a name, Rachel, and her son Hersh and I also share a name. And her husband's name is Jonathan. Like many of you, I was drawn to Rachel's strength, perseverance, determination, fierce maternal love as I watched her transform herself into an advocate, an activist, a diplomat. I tried to imagine myself in her situation, tried to imagine summoning that kind of strength, tried to imagine having to discipline myself to put my pain into action and not indulge myself into falling apart. Listen to what she said. Rachel Goldberg-Polin said at her son Hersh's funeral. At first, she speaks directly to him. She says, "My sweet Hersh," and I've amended this just a tiny bit for clarity here. As we transform our hope into grief of this new unknown brand of pain, I beg you, please do what you can to have your light shine down on all of us. Help shower us with healing and resilience. Help us to rise again. I know it will take a long time, but please, may God bless us that one fine day we will hear laughter and we will turn around and see that it is us and that we are okay. You will always be with us as a force of love and vitality. You will become our superpower. I want to say now the sincerest and most heartfelt thank you to the countless people in our extended community who have held us, cared for us, prayed for us, cooked for us, and carried us when we could not stand up. I'm so thankful to you, and I apologize deeply, but we will need continued help to get through this sickening new chapter too. I am so sorry to ask because we have given you nothing, and you have already given so profoundly and completely, but I beg of you all, please don't leave us now. Okay, sweet boy, go now on your journey. I hope it's as good as the trips you dreamed about, because finally, my sweet, sweet boy, finally, you are free. I can only imagine the private tears Rachel Goldberg-Polin and her family are weeping. And I know from my own much less painful experiences with grief and with watching others grieve, that it doesn't simply disappear from your life. That you continue to feel your losses, sometimes in unexpected moments. But I also know that even those who have sustained the worst, most tragic losses somehow summon the strength to keep living, not to sit by the side of the road in tears for all time. And so it seems to me this year, as I listen to the words of Jeremiah, that Rachel Goldberg-Polin somehow redeems Rachel Imenu. That our modern Rachel gives us a different model than our ancient one, and in so doing, may help us transcend some of the intergenerational trauma, the persona of suffering, as Adine Steinsaltz says, that we've often succumbed to as a people. Unlike Rachel Imenu, the biblical Rachel who refuses to be comforted, Rachel Goldberg-Polin reaches out for comfort. She enlists others to provide comfort. At her own son's funeral, she speaks to her community, telling them that she's grateful for their support, and that she and her family will still need that support. At her own son's funeral, she envisions her surviving family members forgetting their grief long enough to catch themselves laughing and living. At her own son's funeral, she answers her own grief by insisting on gratitude for the gift of motherhood, for the gift of her son. In the famous Midrash in Echa Rabbah about Rachel Imenu, biblical Rachel, after a veritable parade of biblical ancestors who come before God to plead the case of the exiled Israelites, it is her tears, Rachel's tears, according to the Midrash, that pierce God's heart long enough to allow the exiled Israelites to return home. The Midrash quotes our Jeremiah text to affirm, "Your weeping has had its purpose. Your grief work is done. Now you can quiet your tears." There's one more biblical mother who appears with us on Rosh Hashanah. We don't usually include her with the others, but maybe that is another tikkun, another healing we can make for ourselves. Our sages say that the 100 blasts of the shofar correspond to the wailing of the mother of the ancient Canaanite general Sisera, as she waits for his return and comes to realize that he is not coming back. So when we gather on Rosh Hashanah, the rabbis tell us to make this remarkable reference point. When we hear the shofar calls, which are meant to waken our compassion, to inspire our commitment to bring godly goodness into this world through our lives, we are meant to hear them through Sisera's mother's wailing. As we may join Rachel Goldberg Polin and the thousands of others Israelis who will mourn their lost loved ones, may we also find our hearts big and strong enough to mourn with those on the other side, to refuse to relinquish our aspiration to live lives of empathy during a time of war. May it be so for us. Amen.